The enormous arena stood as a monument to the galaxy's might, its sleek metallic walls glowing under the artificial lights. Thousands of spectators filled the seats, all of them watching with bated breath. It was the grandest competition of the galaxy, where warriors from different planets and species fought to prove their strength and skill. But today the crowd was especially excited because it wasn't just any warrior who would step into the arena. It was a human warrior named Daniel. He had heard whispers in the halls about the upcoming challenge, how humans were known to be weak compared to the other races, how they were viewed as an amusing curiosity, especially by the alien princesses. But Daniel had never cared much about what others thought of him. He'd trained his whole life, and his sword was just as sharp as anyone else's. Daniel stood near the entrance of the arena, wearing his armor, his sword strapped to his back. The crowd's cheers and shouts filled the air, but his mind was focused. He was used to the noise. It was the clash of blades, the rush of battle, that got his heart pumping. "You can do this," he whispered to himself. Behind him, there were two warriors, the first a massive alien known for his strength, and the second the princess. She was from the Vinner species, a race known for their intelligence and fierce combat abilities. Tall, with long silver hair and violet skin, she had a regal aura about her. She was also the best fighter in the galaxy. Well, that's what they all said. The princess, Lyra, stood confidently, her sharp violet eyes scanning the arena. Her armor shimmered as she adjusted it, her gaze occasionally flicking toward Daniel. A smirk danced on her lips, clearly amused by the presence of this human. "Ready?" one of the officials asked, stepping forward with a microphone in hand. Daniel simply nodded, his eyes locked on the princess. There was no fear in his heart, just determination. He had been through tougher situations, but the princess, she was different. She didn't look at him with disdain as many did. No, her eyes seemed to gleam with something else. Amusement, maybe even curiosity. "Let the duel begin," the official announced. Lyra moved first, faster than Daniel had expected. She darted toward him with blinding speed, her sword ablur as it swung toward his chest. Daniel was quick to react, his training kicking in as he sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the blade. His heart raced, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He was fast, but he knew he couldn't outmuscle her. The only way to win was to outthink her. Lyra laughed, a low, mocking sound that echoed across the arena. "Is that all you've got, human?" she taunted. Her voice was smooth, yet dripping with sarcasm. "I hope the bulge between your legs isn't the same size as your sword." The crowd erupted in laughter, some of them even gasping at the audacity of her words. Daniel's eyes narrowed. It was an insult, yes, but it wasn't the first time someone had mocked him for his size. He had been hearing those kinds of comments his whole life, and they never bothered him. But the way Lyra said it with such confidence and ease irritated him. It wasn't just an insult to his physical appearance. It was an insult to his strength, his worth. Daniel clenched his fists. The duel was no longer about winning for the glory, it was about proving something. To her, to himself. "You'll regret that," he muttered under his breath. Without warning, Daniel charged forward. His sword was drawn in a smooth, fluid motion, aimed directly for her midsection. Lyra was quick, though. She blocked it with ease, their blades clashing with a metallic ring that sent vibrations through the ground. For a moment, the two stood face to face, their weapons locked. Lyra's smirk hadn't faded. "Is that all?" she taunted again, pushing against his sword with ease. Daniel gritted his teeth. He couldn't let her get under his skin. He had to focus. He quickly shifted his weight, using his smaller frame to his advantage as he spun around and delivered a swift strike toward her side. Lyra barely reacted in time, her sword barely managing to deflect his blow. She stumbled back, her eyes widening slightly as she registered the skill in his movements. There it was, the first crack in her confident exterior. Daniel didn't give her a chance to recover. He pressed forward, relentless in his attack. Each strike was calculated, each movement purposeful. He wasn't just fighting for victory, he was fighting for respect. And as the seconds ticked by, he could see the princess beginning to lose that air of superiority she wore so well. "Not bad, human," she admitted, her voice finally losing its mocking edge, but she was still taunting him. "Maybe you have more to offer than I thought." But Daniel wasn't listening to her anymore. His focus was entirely on the battle, on the fight itself. He had grown up being underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. But now, in the heat of the moment, he was showing everyone, especially her, that he wasn't to be written off so easily. The fight continued for what felt like hours. Daniel's muscles burned with exhaustion, but his will remained unshaken. Lyra, for all her strength and speed, couldn't keep up with his tenacity. With each blow, she seemed to be losing her edge. Finally, after a particularly well-executed parry, Daniel disarmed her. Lyra's sword flew out of her hand and landed several feet away. For a split second, there was silence. The crowd held its breath, unsure of what would happen next. Lyra stood frozen, her chest heaving, but there was no arrogance in her posture anymore. She met Daniel's gaze, her eyes narrowing as she assessed him. "Well, well," she said, her voice no longer mocking but genuine. "You're better than I expected." Daniel's sword was still raised, the tip just inches from her throat. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. He could end it right there, with a single move. But something stopped him. Maybe it was respect, or maybe it was something else. But for the first time in this fight, he didn't feel the need to prove anything to her. Instead, he lowered his sword. "You're not so bad yourself," Daniel said, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Lyra raised an eyebrow. "You're letting me go?" Daniel shrugged. "You've earned my respect. Besides, this fight isn't over. Not yet." There was a long pause. Then, with a slow smile, Lyra extended her hand toward him. "Maybe we'll see who's truly the better fighter soon enough." The crowd, still stunned by the turn of events, erupted into applause. Daniel, once the underdog, had made a statement. He wasn't just another weak human warrior. He was a force to be reckoned with. And Lyra, despite her earlier mockery, knew she had just met her match. As the two warriors stood in the center of the arena, the crowd's cheers deafening around them, they shared a moment of understanding. The battle was far from over. This was just the beginning. The cheers of the crowd echoed throughout the arena as the last blow was struck. Daniel stood in the center, his sword still held low, his chest heaving with exertion. Lyra, the princess, was not on her knees, but her stance had shifted. The mocking tone in her voice had disappeared. For the first time, there was a flicker of something different in her eyes. Respect. She didn't even seem angry. Instead, she studied him, her violet eyes locked onto his. For a brief moment, the crowd's roar seemed to fade into the background as the two warriors shared an unspoken understanding. The fight was over, for now, but something had changed. Lyra was the first to break the silence. "Well, that was unexpected," she said with a smirk, though it wasn't one of mockery. It was more of a grudging admiration. She wiped the sweat from her brow, looking at him more seriously than before. Daniel's eyes remained steady. "You're not so bad yourself," he said, trying to mask the weariness in his voice. Despite how close the battle had been, he was still feeling the effects of the duel, but he wasn't about to let that show. With a flick of her wrist, Lyra called for her sword. It slid effortlessly across the floor toward her, as if the weapon had a mind of its own. She caught it with ease and slid it back into place, her movements fluid and graceful. "Let's call this a draw," Lyra suggested, her tone lighter now, though still filled with the authority of someone who had been born to lead. "I think we both need to rest." Daniel nodded, feeling a slight relief in his muscles at the thought. But the adrenaline had left him feeling more alive than ever. It was the first time he had fought someone who had pushed him to his absolute limit. "Fine by me," Daniel agreed, stepping back and wiping the sweat from his face. "But next time I won't go easy." Lyra raised an eyebrow, a sly smile playing on her lips. "I'll hold you to that, human." The crowd's cheers began to die down as the two warriors left the arena, their rivalry still present but tempered by mutual respect. They were both strong, both skilled in combat, but there was something more. After the duel, Daniel found himself walking alongside Lyra toward the preparation room. The atmosphere had shifted. The air between them was no longer thick with tension and mockery, but had become more complex. "So, you really think you can beat me?" Lyra asked, her voice now laced with curiosity rather than arrogance. She glanced over at him, her violet eyes gleaming. Daniel couldn't help but chuckle at her confidence. "You're fast, and I'll admit, you're strong, but there's something about you that I think I can work around." Lyra looked at him for a moment before speaking again. "Is that so? You do know. You're the first human to ever land a blow on me." Daniel shrugged. "I guess I'm just special." She laughed, but it wasn't mocking. It was genuine. "You're certainly different." As they continued walking, they were met with the usual whispers and stares. Lyra had always been the center of attention, her beauty and power unmatched by most. But now, there was a new murmur in the air. They didn't just see her as a powerful princess anymore. They saw her standing next to a human warrior who had just taken her to the edge of defeat. "Why don't you join me for a drink?" Lyra offered as they approached the door. "There's no reason to keep our distance now." Daniel looked at her, hesitant. He wasn't sure if this was another test or if she genuinely wanted to talk, but either way, he couldn't deny that the idea of having a conversation with her outside of the arena was appealing. "Sure," he agreed, stepping inside the room with her. The room was lavishly decorated, a stark contrast to the cold, mechanical nature of the arena. There were cushions piled on the floor, a large table in the center, and a view that overlooked the entire complex. The walls were adorned with paintings and trophies from battles long past. Lyra gestured to one of the cushions. "Make yourself comfortable." Daniel sat down, though he couldn't fully relax. He wasn't used to being around royalty, let alone one who had just tried to slice him in half moments ago. But the way Lyra spoke, the way she carried herself now, made it clear that she was more than just the princess. She was someone who valued strength, who appreciated a challenge. A servant brought them both a drink, something colorful, with a faint sparkle in the liquid. Lyra took a sip and looked at Daniel. "You're different from what I expected." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "You're not intimidated by me," she said simply. "Most people are. They see the title of princess, and they bow down before me, before even seeing what I can do. But you stood your ground." Daniel took a sip of his own drink, savoring the sweet taste. "I've never been one to bow down to anyone, regardless of their title." Lyra smirked again, though this time it was more playful than before. "I like that." A silence fell between them as they both drank, neither of them speaking for a while. There was no tension now, no animosity. Just two warriors who had fought and respected each other's skills. "Tell me, human," Lyra began, breaking the silence. "How is it that you've come so far? I've heard stories, of course, but I want to hear it from you. What drives you?" Daniel leaned back, his eyes scanning the room as he thought. "I've had to prove myself my whole life. Humans, we're not like the other species. We don't have the physical strength, the natural advantages that others do. But what we do have is determination. And that's what gets me through every fight." Lyra considered his words for a moment. "I can see that. You didn't just rely on your sword, you used your mind." Daniel nodded. "It's the only way to survive." The conversation continued into the night, with both of them sharing stories and laughs. The princess who had once mocked him now seemed genuinely interested in him as a person. And for Daniel, the respect he had for her grew with every word she spoke. As the evening wore on, they found themselves standing side by side at the balcony overlooking the stars. Lyra didn't speak immediately, but there was a change in the air. The rivalry, the mockery, the tension, it was all gone. In its place was something else, something that neither of them could define just yet. "You know," Lyra said quietly, breaking the silence. "I didn't expect this." Daniel glanced over at her. "What do you mean?" "You," she said, her voice soft. I didn't expect to find someone who could not only match me in battle but also make me rethink everything. Daniel turned to face her fully. I didn't expect to be standing here with you either. They stood there for a moment, just the two of them, as the stars twinkled above. A new chapter had begun between them, one that neither had expected but both would come to understand in time. The next day, the competition continued, but there was a noticeable shift. Daniel and Lyra no longer exchanged insults or barbs. Instead, they worked together, their movements in sync as they took on new challenges. The mockery was gone, replaced with a deepening respect. The battles ahead would not be easy, but Daniel now knew that he had an ally in the princess, a formidable one at that. And as for Lyra, she had learned something important. The strength of a warrior wasn't just measured by the size of their muscles or the sharpness of their sword. It was measured by their heart, their resolve, and Daniel had that in spades. The next few days passed in a blur of training, missions, and more than a few dangerous encounters. Daniel and Lyra were forced to work together on various assignments, missions, that tested not only their combat skills but their ability to think and adapt in the heat of battle. Every time they entered a new challenge, their movements became more synchronized, their partnership evolving. They no longer exchanged words full of mockery or arrogance. Instead, their conversations were filled with mutual respect, each of them learning something new from the other. One such mission had brought them to a desolate moon, far from the glitz and glamour of the arena. The mission had seemed simple enough at first, disrupting an illegal weapons trade, but quickly turned into a fierce battle when they found themselves surrounded by heavily armed mercenaries. It was the first time since their duel that they truly fought side by side. Daniel had grown accustomed to the alien princess's fighting style, the way she moved, quick, calculated, and merciless. And in turn, Lyra had learned to respect Daniel's style, the way he combined speed with strategy, always thinking 2 steps ahead. As the battle raged on, Daniel found himself back to back with Lyra, their swords clashing with the mercenaries' weapons. He'd lost track of how many they had taken down, but the fight wasn't over yet. The mercenaries kept coming, and soon they were surrounded. "Don't let your guard down," Lyra warned, her voice steady but laced with urgency. Daniel nodded, his eyes scanning the chaotic battlefield. He could feel the pressure mounting, but it was in moments like these that he felt most alive. There was something exhilarating about fighting beside someone who understood the weight of every strike, every decision. The mercenaries closed in on them from all sides. One of them lunged at Lyra, but she moved with a speed so fast it was almost a blur. In a single, fluid motion, her sword found its mark and the enemy crumpled to the ground. Daniel, not one to be outdone, blocked a blow from another mercenary and countered with a swift strike. His sword landed on the mercenary's shoulder, and with a yelp, the attacker fell back. But Daniel didn't stop. He pressed forward, his every movement calculated and precise. It wasn't long before the tide of battle shifted in their favor. The mercenaries, though strong, were no match for the combined might of the human and the Vinner princess. In the end, only a few remained, and the rest scattered, defeated. Lyra stood victorious, her chest heaving with effort, her sword gleaming in the light of the moon. Daniel, too, stood proudly, his sword dripping with the remnants of battle. "You're getting better at this," Lyra said, her voice softer than usual. It wasn't the usual mocking tone she had used in the arena. It was something warmer, more sincere. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow and grinned. "You too, I didn't think I'd see the day when you'd actually compliment me." Lyra smirked, but there was no mockery in it. "Don't get used to it, human." The two of them shared a laugh, the weight of their victory lightening the air between them. For the first time since their duel, Daniel didn't feel like an outsider. He didn't feel like he was trying to prove something to anyone. He was simply a warrior, fighting alongside another. After the mission, they returned to the ship, their bodies bruised and tired, but their spirits lifted. The princess's earlier mocking words seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by something deeper. They had become allies in the truest sense of the word. As they entered the ship, Lyra turned to Daniel, her expression more serious now. "You fight with honor, she said, her voice quiet. I don't often find that in others. It's rare. Daniel looked at her, his expression softening. I fight for what's right, and I fight for the people who can't defend themselves. Lyra studied him for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. I used to think the same way, but over the years I've had to make decisions that go against my morals. Sometimes to protect my people, I have to do things I don't want to do. Daniel frowned, sensing the pain behind her words. What kind of things? Lyra hesitated before answering. Things I can't explain, but it's a burden I've had to carry since I was young. As a princess, I can't afford to be weak, and sometimes that means making choices that aren't black and white. Daniel nodded, understanding her more than she realized. He, too, had faced difficult choices in his life, choices that had weighed on him long after they were made. But one thing was clear. They both shared a burden, one that tied them together. Everyone carries a burden, Daniel said quietly, but it doesn't mean we have to carry it alone. Lyra's gaze softened, the walls she had so carefully built up over the years beginning to crack. Maybe you're right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The conversation lingered in the air as they sat down to rest. For the first time, they weren't just two warriors sharing a victory. They were two individuals, both scarred by their pasts, but finding comfort in each other's presence. The following days were filled with more missions and training, but there was a noticeable change in their dynamic. The sarcasm, the teasing, the mockery, they were all gone. In their place was something much more meaningful. They became partners in every sense of the word, both in battle and in their personal lives. The bond they shared was unspoken, but it was real. Lyra began to open up more, sharing bits and pieces of her past. She spoke of her family, her royal duties, and the weight of expectations placed upon her shoulders. She told him of the countless battles she had fought, the lives she had taken in the name of her people. But she also spoke of the things she wished she could change, choices she had made that still haunted her. Daniel, in turn, shared his own story. He spoke of his life on Earth, of the wars that had shaped him into the man he was today. He told her of the struggles he faced growing up, the way people had looked down on him because he was human, but he also spoke of the moments that had made him proud, the times when he had overcome the odds and shown the galaxy what humans were capable of. With each conversation, they grew closer. They began to understand each other in ways neither of them had expected. They were no longer just a human and a princess. They were two souls who had fought and survived together, and in the process had found something deeper than friendship. But despite the growing bond between them, Lyra still held herself back. She was a princess after all. And there were rules, expectations she could not escape. Daniel sensed it, though. He could see the hesitation in her eyes whenever their conversations veered too close to something more personal. He knew she was afraid to let her guard down completely. After all, she had spent her entire life building walls around her heart. But Daniel was patient. He knew that in time, she would come to trust him. He wasn't in a hurry. For now, he was content with the friendship they had built. But as they continued to fight side by side, as they continued to face the challenges ahead, he couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them. Their next mission took them to the heart of a distant galaxy, where a powerful enemy had taken control of an ancient, forgotten world. The enemy was ruthless, their forces overwhelming. But Daniel and Lyra were ready. They had been through too much together to be defeated now. As they prepared to face the enemy, Lyra turned to Daniel, her expression hard but determined. "We're in this together," she said, her voice steady. Daniel nodded. "Together," he echoed. And for the first time in a long while, he truly believed it. The sun was setting over the distant galaxy as the final mission loomed ahead. Daniel and Lyra stood side by side, looking out at the war-torn landscape before them. Their objective was simple: take down the enemy commander, an individual whose cruelty had spread across countless worlds. The enemy had taken control of the ancient, forgotten planet using its vast resources to fuel their empire. It was time to put an end to it. But this time, it wasn't just about the mission. It was personal. For the first time since they had met, Daniel felt a connection to Lyra that went beyond the battlefield. The bond they had forged was stronger now. They were more than just allies. They were partners, in every sense of the word. "Can't say I've ever faced an enemy like this before," Daniel said, breaking the silence. Lyra turned her head to look at him, her violet eyes thoughtful. "Neither have I," she replied, her voice steady but laced with a hint of concern. "The stakes are higher this time. This isn't just about taking down an army. This is about taking down an empire." Daniel nodded. "I've fought in my fair share of wars, but I've never fought for something as important as this." Lyra raised an eyebrow, her gaze piercing. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean," Daniel said, "this fight isn't just about survival or proving we can win. It's about stopping something that could destroy everything." Her eyes softened at his words, and for the first time in a long while she saw him not as just another warrior, but as someone who understood what it meant to protect, to fight for something bigger than yourself. "We fight together then," she said quietly. "We end this together." They had fought side by side countless times, but something about the way she said those words made this moment different. It was as if the weight of their shared history, their struggles and victories, had all led to this. The mission ahead wasn't going to be easy. The enemy had fortified their position and they had a small army of loyal soldiers. But Daniel and Lyra were no strangers to impossible odds. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. The assault began under the cover of darkness. The two of them moved like shadows, sneaking past the enemy's outer defenses. Their goal was to reach the heart of the enemy's stronghold and neutralize the commander. Every step was calculated, every decision crucial. The silence of the night was broken only by the soft whispers of their movements, the steady beat of their hearts. As they approached the inner walls of the stronghold, the tension between them was palpable. Daniel could feel Lyra's gaze on him as they crouched behind a rock, awaiting the next step. "You ready?" she asked in a whisper. Daniel nodded. "Born ready." Without another word, they made their way through the maze of corridors. There, stepped swift and silent. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, as if they had been fighting together for years. Lyra led the way, her sharp senses guiding them through the labyrinth, while Daniel kept a lookout, his hand always on the hilt of his sword. They reached the control room undetected, but the enemy commander was waiting for them. The moment they stepped inside, he stood, his towering figure looming over them. His armor gleamed in the dim light, and his eyes burned with malice. "Well, well," he said, his voice low and menacing. "The human and the princess. I've been expecting you." Lyra's eyes narrowed as she stepped forward. "We're here to end this," she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "This is where your reign ends." The commander chuckled darkly. "You think you can defeat me? I've crushed entire fleets with a single blow. What makes you think you can stop me?" Daniel's eyes flicked to Lyra. She nodded once, and without another word they sprang into action. Lyra moved first, her blade flashing as she darted toward the commander, her strikes fast and precise. The commander parried with ease, his strength clearly superior to theirs. He was powerful, but Lyra was faster. She knew she couldn't overpower him, but she could outmaneuver him. Daniel took a step back, watching carefully. He knew this battle wasn't about brute strength. They would have to outwit him, just like they had done so many times before. The commander swung his sword at Lyra, but she dodged, rolling to the side and coming up behind him. She slashed at his back, but the commander spun around in time to block her strike. He was good, very good, but they were better together. Daniel moved in then, using his speed and agility to distract the commander. He feinted to the left and then lunged to the right, catching the commander off guard. His sword grazed the commander's shoulder, leaving a shallow cut. The commander grunted, turning his attention to Daniel. "You'll pay for that, human." But Daniel didn't flinch. He had faced death before. This was nothing new. The fight raged on, each of them pushing their limits. Lyra's attacks grew more focused, her strikes faster, while Daniel's movements became even more calculated. Together, they were a well-oiled machine. Every time the commander thought he had the upper hand, one of them was there to counter. Finally, after what felt like hours, Daniel saw his chance. The commander had let his guard slip just for a moment. Daniel rushed forward, his sword aimed, directly for the commander's heart. With a swift motion, he thrust it into the commander's chest. The commander gasped, his hand falling to the blade as he crumpled to the ground. "You," he started, but the words died in his throat. His lifeless body hit the floor with a heavy thud. Lyra stood beside Daniel, panting heavily, her chest rising and falling with exertion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence of the room was deafening. "We did it," Daniel said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded, her expression unreadable. "It's over," she said quietly, though a part of her knew that this victory, however important, would not undo everything that had come before. The battle was won, but the scars of their pasts remained. Later that night, after the dust had settled, Daniel and Lyra found themselves once again on the balcony of the ship looking out at the stars. The galaxy had been saved, but there was something in the air, something heavier than the weight of their victory. Lyra was the first to speak. "I don't know if I can ever truly repay you for what you've done," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of the unspoken. Daniel turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "You don't owe me anything," he said, his voice steady. "We fought together. That's all that matters." For a moment the two of them stood in silence, the stars overhead shining like a beacon in the darkness. They had fought and bled together. But in the end, it wasn't just about the battles they fought. It was about the trust they had built, the bond that had formed between them. Lyra turned toward him, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. "I didn't think I'd ever find someone like you," she said quietly. "Someone who would stand by me no matter what." Daniel smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "I didn't think I'd ever find someone like you either." And in that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't the mocking words, the rivalry, or the competition anymore. It was something deeper, something that neither of them had expected but both had come to rely on. They were no longer just allies. They were more than that now. Partners, friends, and perhaps in time something more. "You know," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're not so bad, human." Daniel chuckled. "You're not so bad yourself, princess." And as they stood together under the vast expanse of the stars, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. No matter the challenges, no matter the battles, they would always stand side by side.